They say Ember Ridge doesn't just test your strength, it tests your soul. And when the wind howls, it carries secrets that can change everything. In the vast expanse of Montana territory, where skies stretched endlessly and horizons blurred into dreams unfulfilled, there lay a patch of land known as Ember Ridge. It wasn't grand or prosperous. It was rugged, unforgiving, and stubborn like the sisters who called it home. Nora, Sadie, and Lila Caldwell had inherited not just the land but also its burdens. Their father's death had left them with nothing but debt, determination, and the haunting question, could they hold on? Nora, the eldest of the three sisters, carried herself with a quiet strength that masked the weight she bore on her shoulders. Her hands, calloused and rough, like worn leather, told the story of years spent laboring under the unforgiving Montana sky. Every fence post driven into stubborn earth, every animal tended to in freezing cold, had left its mark on her body and soul. It was her heart, hardened by loss and sacrifice, that truly defined her. Since their father's death, Nora had shouldered the burden of keeping Ember Ridge alive, refusing help from anyone outside their small family. She learned early on that help always came with strings attached, strings that could choke the life out of independence and self-reliance. "We don't need daylight," she often muttered to herself when exhaustion threatened to overtake her. "We just need more time." But even time seemed to be running out, as debts mounted and the land demanded more than they could give. Sadie, the middle sister, was different, not in her determination, but in how she chose to face despair. Where Nora fought back with grit and silence, Sadie wielded laughter like a shield against the harshness of their reality. Her jokes and stories were meant to lighten the mood, to remind them all that life wasn't entirely bleak. Yet lately, her laughter had grown quieter, softer, almost brittle. It no longer filled the spaces between them with warmth. Instead, it echoed faintly, like a fire struggling to stay lit in a storm. The fences sagged lower each season. The roof leaked after every rain, and the herd thinned with each passing winter. They had sold the wagon, then the silver, then anything else of value they could part with. Still, it wasn't enough. One evening, as another storm rolled in, Sadie looked at her older sister with desperation creeping into her voice. "We can't patch forever, Nora," she said, her usual cheer replaced by a rare vulnerability. "We're running out of rope and luck." Then there was Lila, the youngest, who observed everything with an intensity that belied her age. Quiet and introspective, Lila saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. Her imagination painted vivid pictures of places far beyond Ember Ridge, places where skies weren't weighed down by storms, where fields yielded bountiful harvests without fail, and where people didn't carry the kind of burdens that bent their backs before their time. She told stories late at night, spinning tales of adventure and hope that transported her sisters to worlds untouched by hardship. But even Lila couldn't fully escape the crushing weight of their circumstances. Beneath her dreamy exterior lay a wisdom that came from watching too much, feeling too deeply, and understanding things she wished she didn't. When Sadie brought up the idea that would change everything, Lila listened intently, her sharp eyes missing nothing. It happened one particularly violent night, when rain battered the roof like fists pounding on a door, and thunder shook the walls with a fury that made the very earth tremble. Sadie sat hunched over the kitchen table, clutching an old newspaper clipping she'd found weeks ago, but hadn't dared mention until now. The headline read, "Western Men Seek Marriage and Honest Work." Her fingers traced the faded ink nervously as she finally spoke, her voice hesitant, almost afraid to break the tense silence. "What if this is our answer?" she asked, glancing up at Nora. "What do you mean, our answer?" Nora snapped, her tone sharp enough to cut through the noise of the storm raging outside. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously, already bracing herself for whatever reckless suggestion Sadie was about to propose. Mail-order husbands, Sadie whispered, barely audible over the howling wind. The words hung in the air like smoke curling from a dying fire. Dangerous, intoxicating, and impossible to ignore. Men willing to work, willing to stay. Her voice trailed off, unsure whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity of it all. Lila chimed in softly, her gaze distant, as though she were seeing something none of them could, or men hiding from something worse than us. She murmured, her observation cutting through the room like a knife. For a moment, no one spoke. The idea lingered between them, heavy and fraught with implications neither of them wanted to confront directly. Were they really considering inviting strangers into their lives? Strangers who might bring with them secrets darker than the storms that swept across the ridge? Yet desperation has a way of silencing doubt. What began as a fleeting thought soon took root, growing into a plan born of necessity rather than choice. Late at night, by the flickering light of a dying fire, the sisters picked up pens and paper. Each letter they wrote carried the weight of their hopes and fears, their dreams and doubts. They weren't writing fairy tales or seeking rescues. They were fighting for survival, for the land that had raised them and shaped them, even as it threatened to consume them whole. But what they didn't know, and couldn't have predicted, was that these letters would summon men whose pasts were as scarred and complicated as their own. Men who carried burdens heavier than any load of timber or hay. Men whose fates would intertwine with theirs in ways that would challenge everything they thought they knew about trust, love, and redemption. And so, beneath the relentless storms of Ember Ridge, seeds of possibility were sown. Seeds that would grow into something neither wholly beautiful nor entirely broken, but undeniably real. The train's screeching halt at the desolate station felt like an intrusion on the stillness of Ember Ridge. For a moment, even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath, as if it too sensed that something significant was about to unfold. The platform, a rickety wooden structure barely wide enough for two people, creaked underfoot as three figures disembarked from the passenger car. They were not heroes riding in to save the day, nor villains arriving with malice in their hearts. Instead, they carried themselves with a quiet heaviness, each man burdened by secrets so profound they could have sunk a ship. The first to step forward was Rafe. His boots struck the planks of the platform with deliberate purpose, every movement measured and grounded. Broad-shouldered and imposing, he cast a long shadow over the anxious sisters waiting below. There was no swagger in his stance, only resolve etched into the lines of his weathered face. He tipped his hat slightly, just enough to acknowledge their presence, but his gaze remained steady and unyielding. "I'm here to work and stay, if I'm wanted," he said, his deep voice cutting through the tension like a blade. It wasn't a plea or a boast. It was a simple declaration, yet it carried the weight of someone who had walked far and endured much to reach this point. Next came Luke, whose polished boots gleamed despite the swirling dust and dirt kicked up by the departing train. His appearance was striking, a stark contrast to the ruggedness of Ember Ridge. The boots, though scuffed slightly from travel, shone with care, as if he'd taken extra time to ensure they reflected his confidence. Unlike Rafe's stoic demeanor, which seemed carved out of stone, Luke exuded charm effortlessly. He flashed a confident grin as he removed his hat in an exaggerated yet somehow endearing bow towards Sadie. "You're braver than your letter made you sound," he teased, his tone light and playful, carrying just enough flirtation to make Sadie raise an eyebrow. But beneath the surface of his easygoing manner, there was something else, something fleeting but undeniable. A flicker of uncertainty in his eyes hinted at battles fought and scars hidden beneath his polished exterior. It was as though the jovial mask he wore wasn't entirely seamless, revealing cracks that suggested pain or regret lurking underneath. Was this man truly here for a fresh start? Or was he escaping something darker? Then Nolan stepped off the train, lean and wiry, his sharp features framed by wind-tousled hair that looked like it hadn't been tamed in days. There was an intensity about him that immediately set him apart from the others. His presence wasn't imposing in the traditional sense. He wasn't tall or broad-shouldered, but his piercing gaze and deliberate movements commanded attention. Lila instinctively took a step back when their eyes met, her curiosity mingling with unease. She couldn't quite place why she felt so unsettled, but there was something unnerving about the way he carried himself, as if every move was calculated. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, almost hesitant, as though choosing each word carefully. "Do you believe people deserve second chances?" he asked, his piercing gaze locking on hers. The question hung heavily in the air, unanswered, leaving behind a ripple of intrigue. Who was this man, and what kind of past haunted him to ask such a loaded question upon arrival? Lila found herself wondering if his words were directed at her personally or if they were meant as a statement about his own life. Whatever the case, his cryptic introduction only deepened the mystery surrounding him. As the men gathered their belongings and prepared to follow the sisters back to Ember Ridge, the air grew thick with unanswered questions. Who were these men? What drove them to leave behind whatever lives they had known and venture into the unknown? And why did they seem so reluctant to speak of their pasts? Each man carried himself differently. Rafe with quiet strength, Luke with calculated charm, Nolan with brooding intensity, but all shared a common thread of mystery that left the sisters uneasy. Their initial hope, that these men might bring relief and stability to Ember Ridge, was quickly overshadowed by doubt and apprehension. That night, as the fire crackled low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls of the modest cabin, the sisters exchanged uneasy glances. Nora broke the silence first, her voice low but firm. "This isn't about finding husbands," she muttered, her hands clenched tightly around the edge of her chair. "It's about survival, or destruction." Her words lingered in the room, heavy with implication. They had invited these men into their lives out of desperation, hoping for help to keep Ember Ridge afloat. Yet now, faced with strangers whose motives were unclear and whose histories were shrouded in secrecy, they couldn't shake the feeling that they might be inviting more trouble than salvation. Trust didn't come easily here, not on land that demanded so much and gave so little in return. Every decision carried consequences, some of which could unravel everything they'd worked so hard to protect. Sadie stared into the flames, her mind racing with possibilities. "What if they're running from something worse than we are?" she whispered, voicing the fear none of them dared to articulate fully. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the anxiety she tried to mask with humor earlier. Lila, ever observant, added quietly, "Or what if they're exactly what we need, but can't handle?" Her words carried a dual meaning. While these men might offer the help Ember Ridge desperately required, their presence could also expose vulnerabilities the sisters weren't ready to confront. Could they trust these strangers enough to let them in, knowing that betrayal would cut deeper than any blade? Or should they push them away, risking isolation and failure in order to preserve what little remained of their fragile world? The fire popped softly, breaking the silence, but the questions remained unanswered. Only time would reveal whether these men were allies or adversaries, saviors or saboteurs. On Ember Ridge, where trust was earned slowly and betrayal cut deeper than any blade, the stakes had never been higher. For the sisters, the arrival of these three men marked not just the beginning of a new chapter, but also the potential unraveling of everything they held dear. As the embers glowed faintly in the darkness, the weight of their choices settled over them like the cold Montana night pressing against the cabin walls. Every fence has weak spots. Every story has cracks. And sometimes, digging too deep only uncovers what you wish had stayed buried. As days stretched into weeks, The rhythm of life on Ember Ridge began to shift in subtle but undeniable ways. The land itself seemed to breathe differently with these new arrivals. Three men who brought not just strength and labor, but shadows that lingered long after the sun dipped below the horizon. Rafe worked tirelessly, his hands moving with precision as he repaired fences across the property. Each post he drove into the stubborn earth spoke of a man familiar with hard labor, someone who understood how to mend things that were broken. Not just fences, but perhaps pieces of himself. Yet there was an unspoken weight about him, a quietness that bordered on brooding. He never complained, never asked for help, yet his silence carried secrets deeper than any well. Luke, on the other hand, filled the air with laughter and charm, attempting to win over Sadie with jokes and clumsy attempts at ranch work. His polished boots often slipped in the mud, earning him good-natured teasing from Sadie, though her smile sometimes faltered when she caught glimpses of something beneath his confident exterior, a flicker of uncertainty, maybe even regret. For all his bravado, Luke struggled to adapt fully to this rugged life. It became clear that he wasn't running towards something so much as he was running from it. Then there was Nolan, whose presence felt both magnetic and unsettling. Lean and wiry, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing, Nolan spent hours wandering the ridge alone. He carried a leather-bound notebook everywhere, sketching maps and jotting down notes about the land's contours, its history, and its hidden scars. To Lila, his behavior raised more questions than answers. What was he searching for? Why did he spend so many nights sneaking off toward the abandoned mine shaft? Was he looking for treasure, or was he trying to bury something darker within himself? The revelations came slowly, like frost creeping across a window pane, each one chilling the sisters' resolve. It started innocently enough. One evening, as Nora sorted tools in preparation for the next day's work, she noticed something tucked inside Rafe's saddlebag. A folded wanted poster, worn and stained with sweat, lay hidden among his belongings. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded it, revealing words that cut sharper than any blade. Wanted, Rafe, for betrayal of a partner during ambush. She stared at the paper, her chest tightening as the implications sank in. When she finally confronted Rafe, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her, he didn't flinch. Instead, he admitted everything without hesitation. "I left a man to die to save myself," he said, his gaze unwavering. "But that choice never left me. I came here to build something right for once." Sadie's discovery was equally jarring. While picking up supplies in town, she stumbled upon a letter addressed to Luke, a letter delivered to Ember Ridge by mistake. Handwritten in rough script, it bore a man's threat: "Pay your debts, gambler, or we'll find you." Sadie handed the letter to Luke that night at supper, her expression unreadable. As he read it, his usual confidence wavered. "It's from a man I crossed," he explained quietly. "I cheated to win and ran." Sadie pressed him further, her voice soft but firm. "And you already thought about leaving, didn't you?" Luke hesitated before admitting the truth. "I came here to start over, to be someone better. But they're still looking for me, and I don't know if I can outrun them." Lila's suspicions about Nolan only deepened as she observed his nighttime excursions. One evening, unable to ignore her curiosity any longer, she followed him discreetly, keeping to the shadows as he made his way to the abandoned mine shaft. Watching from a distance, she saw him pull out his notebook and begin sketching furiously, muttering to himself under his breath. What, or whom, was he searching for? Did the mine shaft hold answers to questions he couldn't voice aloud? Or was he hiding something far more dangerous? Each revelation forced the sisters to confront their own fears and doubts. Was opening their hearts worth the risk? Could trust truly take root on soil soaked with doubt and betrayal? The men weren't perfect. They were flawed, fractured, and carrying burdens that threatened to overwhelm them. Yet they had chosen Ember Ridge, just as the sisters had chosen them. And now, faced with the choice between turning away or leaning in, the sisters realized that survival wasn't just about holding onto the land. It was about holding on to each other, flaws and all. By the time winter tightened its grip on the ridge, the air was thick with unspoken truths and fragile beginnings. Trust didn't come easily here. It had to be earned plank by plank, vow by vow. And while the fences around Ember Ridge stood stronger than ever, the real question remained. Could the bonds forming between these unlikely allies withstand the storms ahead? Under the flickering lantern light, tempers flared like sparks from kindling. You think staying means you belong? Nora demanded, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade slicing wood. Belonging isn't given, it's earned. Winter tightened its icy grip on Ember Ridge, testing not only the land but also the fragile bonds forming between its inhabitants. The snowdrifts piled high against fences that groaned under the weight, mirroring the strain building within the hearts of those who called this place home. It was as though the harsh weather had seeped into their souls, freezing over old wounds and cracking open new ones. Every creak of the barn door, every gust of wind rattling the shutters, seemed to echo the unspoken fears and doubts simmering beneath the surface. One particularly bitter evening, after days of relentless storms, Nora confronted Rafe during a heated argument about the north fence. Her face flushed with anger, she accused him sharply. "You're running again." Her words hung heavy in the air, sharp enough to cut glass. But Rafe didn't flinch or raise his voice in return. Instead, he shook his head slowly, his expression steady yet tinged with sadness. "No," he said firmly, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "I stopped running today. I buried my past behind the barn." His tone carried a quiet conviction, as if daring her to see beyond the scars he carried, not just on his body, but in his soul. For Nora, it was both an answer and a challenge, a reminder that trust wasn't something handed out freely. It had to be fought for, plank by plank, moment by moment. Meanwhile, Sadie found herself facing her own breaking point when she caught Luke packing his bags late one night. Her heart sank as she watched him fold shirts and tuck them neatly into his satchel, each movement deliberate and final. Summoning all her courage, she stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "If you leave now," she spat, her words laced with hurt and defiance, "you'll prove exactly what I thought, that no one chooses us first." Luke froze mid-motion, guilt flashing across his face before he turned to face her. "Sadie," he began, his voice softer than usual, "this isn't about choosing. It's about surviving for everyone involved." Yet even as he spoke, the truth lingered painfully between them. Survival meant different things to different people, and sometimes sacrifices came at too great a cost. Lila, ever observant and quietly intuitive, finally mustered the courage to confront Nolan near the abandoned mineshaft. She'd noticed his nightly trips there for weeks, always returning with dirt-streaked hands and a distant look in his eyes. Now, standing in the dim glow of her lantern, she demanded answers. "What are you hiding down there?" she asked, her voice firm despite the chill running down her spine. To her surprise, Nolan didn't evade or deflect. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a tattered journal, its pages worn and yellowed with age. Handing it to her, he said simply, "Proof that some mistakes deserve forgiveness, even if they cost everything." Lila hesitated, her fingers brushing the frayed edges of the book. What secrets lay inside, and could she bear to read them? As these truths spilled forth, each revelation more raw and painful than the last, the sisters realized something profound. They weren't just fighting to save Ember Ridge. They were fighting to save themselves. Every accusation, every admission peeled back another layer of doubt and fear, exposing vulnerabilities they hadn't dared acknowledge before. Could they truly open their hearts to men burdened by such dark histories? Or would trusting them mean risking everything they'd worked so hard to protect? That night, as the fire crackled low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls, the sisters sat together in uneasy silence. Outside, the wind howled like a restless spirit, while inside, the air felt thick with unspoken questions and fragile beginnings. Trust didn't come easily here. It had to be earned piece by piece, vow by vow. And as the embers glowed faintly in the darkness, they understood that the real battle wasn't against the land or the storms or even the strangers who had arrived seeking redemption. It was a battle against their own fears, doubts, and insecurities. Could they find strength in vulnerability? Could they forgive others and themselves? By morning, the snow had settled deeper, blanketing the ridge in a pristine white that seemed almost peaceful. But beneath the surface, tensions still simmered, waiting for resolution. On Ember Ridge, where survival depended on grit and grace alike, the stakes had never been higher. On the coldest night of winter, the barn transformed into a sanctuary of warmth and promise. Lanterns glowed gold, fiddles sang tales of hope, and vows were exchanged, not of perfection, but of perseverance. The air inside the barn was alive with emotion, crackling like the fire that had been stoked to keep out the biting chill of winter. Every corner of the old structure seemed to hum with life, lanterns casting golden light against rough-hewn wooden beams, their glow softening the harsh edges of years past. The flickering flames danced across the walls, creating shadows that swayed gently, as if they too were part of the celebration. Fiddles played melodies that felt as ancient as the land itself, weaving stories of resilience, joy, and second chances. Each note carried weight, telling tales of struggles overcome and hopes renewed. The music filled the space, carrying laughter and tears alike, its rhythm echoing off the weathered walls and mingling with the comforting sense of cinnamon pies, roasted meats, and fresh-cut pine boughs. It wasn't fancy, it didn't need to be. This was Ember Ridge, where beauty lay not in polish or perfection, but in authenticity, in the raw grit of people who refused to give up even when the odds were stacked against them. Here, under the humble roof of an old barn, the essence of survival and hope intertwined seamlessly, creating a moment both sacred and deeply human. As the preacher stood at the makeshift altar draped with pine branches and a single cotton ribbon, his presence commanded quiet reverence without demanding attention. His voice rang steady and kind, offering words simple yet profound, each syllable resonating with sincerity. "Nora," he began, turning to her first, his tone warm but unwavering. "Do you take this man to walk beside you through hard seasons and good?" The question hung in the air for a brief moment, heavy with meaning, before Nora's answer came swiftly, clear, and resolute. "I do." Her voice carried a strength that seemed to fill the entire barn, a testament to the battle she'd fought, not just for herself but for the land and the life she cherished. Rafe's response followed, his deep voice unwavering as he promised to stand by her side through storms and sun. There was no hesitation in his words, only a quiet certainty that mirrored the man he was, steadfast, grounded, and true. When the preacher nodded, signaling their moment, Rafe leaned down to kiss Nora, a slow, reverent gesture that spoke volumes about the journey they'd traveled together. It wasn't just a kiss, it was an unspoken acknowledgement of all they had endured, the doubts, the fears, the sacrifices, and all they now chose to build together. For just a heartbeat, he rested his forehead against hers, sealing not only a vow, but a shared understanding. They weren't perfect, but they were committed to building something real. In that fleeting pause, the world outside seemed to fade. The relentless winds, the unforgiving land, the hardships that had once threatened to tear them apart, all dissolved into the stillness of the barn. It was as though time itself held its breath, allowing the magnitude of the moment to settle over everyone present. The simplicity of the ceremony underscored its power. There were no elaborate decorations or ornate rituals, just honest words spoken under a roof held together by years of labor and love. The lantern light danced across the faces of those gathered, illuminating smiles tinged with both joy and relief. Each person in the room understood what this union symbolized. Not just the joining of two lives, but the reaffirmation of a community bound by shared struggles and unspoken promises. As Rafe stepped back slightly, keeping one hand firmly in Nora's, it was clear that this was more than a wedding. It was a declaration of faith in themselves, in each other, and in the future they dared to believe was possible on Ember Ridge. Next came Sadie, radiant despite her nervous laughter, her cheeks flushed as Luke met her halfway down the aisle. His grin was wide, almost boyish, but there was no mistaking the depth of emotion in his eyes. The preacher asked Sadie, "Do you take this man come dust or snow?" She shot back playfully, "Only if he promises not to outdance me." The crowd erupted in chuckles, easing the tension before Luke's turn. "With everything I have," he declared, his gaze locked firmly on hers. Their kiss was quick and playful, punctuated by Luke dipping Sadie dramatically enough to send another wave of laughter rippling through the barn. These moments weren't polished or rehearsed. They were honest, filled with the messy, beautiful imperfections of love forged under pressure. Lila, too, found her place in the celebration, though hers was quieter, more introspective, shy but radiant. She sat near the edge of the gathering, sketching pictures of what the future might hold. Her pencil moved across the page with purpose, capturing images of blooming fields, sturdy fences, and children running beneath the shade of the cottonwood tree. There was hope in her strokes, not naive optimism, but the kind born of survival and faith in tomorrow. And then there was Nolan, taking her hand gently as they swayed to the music, their connection unspoken but palpable, a quiet promise of shared dreams taking root. By spring, the transformation of Ember Ridge was undeniable. The fences stood firm, weathering even the harshest winds, while the fields burst forth with new crops, their green shoots reaching skyward like prayers answered. Laughter echoed where silence once reigned, filling the vast expanse of the ridge with a sound that felt foreign yet familiar. Life pressed on, sturdier than ever, as if the very soil beneath their feet had taken root in their determination. In the heart of it all, the sisters stood side by side with the men who had chosen to stay, not out of obligation, but because they had come to see Ember Ridge as home. Each couple represented a different facet of love. Nora and Rafe embodied quiet strength, Sadie and Luke radiated playful resilience, and Lila and Nolan symbolized the courage to dream again after loss. Rafe and Nora danced slowly during the festivities, their movements hesitant yet full of meaning. Years of mistrust and guarded hearts melted away as they stepped in rhythm, finding harmony in their shared struggles. Sadie spun circles with Luke, teasing him endlessly about his two left feet, while neighbors clapped and cheered them on. Lila joined in eventually, shyly taking Nolan's hand as they swayed gently to the music. Outside, the cottonwood tree swayed gently in the breeze, its branches shielding the ridge from the world beyond. It was as if the land itself understood the significance of what had transpired within those barn walls. One thing became abundantly clear to everyone present. Love doesn't erase hardship. It grows roots deep enough to withstand it. On Ember Ridge, where trust was earned plank by plank and vow by vow, the bonds formed between these unlikely allies proved stronger than any storm. And so, the story of Ember Ridge became legend, a tale passed down through generations, whispered around campfires, and etched into memory. It was a story of courage, forgiveness, and the unyielding power of second chances. Here, amidst blood-red hills and fading fence lines. Dreams took shape not in spite of struggle, but because of it. The ridge remained a place where survival depended on grit and grace alike, where broken things could be mended and hearts could heal, even if imperfectly. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't marked by grandeur, but by the quiet persistence of those willing to try again, day after day, until the land and the souls on it believed in the possibility of renewal.